This video introduces some of the key concepts and benefits of the CDD test module and test advisor. The first benefit that CDD brings to the table is a reduction in the test cycle time. The problem that we're trying to solve is that there is intense pressure to create and automate as many tests as possible to ensure the overall quality of a release. And that's a good thing, but the more tests we create, the longer it takes to run all of those tests. Now, at the end of a release, as we move closer to production, we want to run all of those tests. But in the middle of development, it might not make sense, especially because there are going to be a lot of test suites that aren't relevant to the latest code changes. To speed up this process, CDD selects a subset of the most relevant tests to run for a given test cycle. This shortens the time to run the tests, identifies issues and provides feedback to the developers more quickly, and it places less load on the test environments. But how does CDD know which tests to select? So there are several heuristics involved in this process. CDD looks at the weighted association between test and the changed code. We look at the previous results of a test run, also known as flaky tests. We also consider newer updated tests and important tests that you, as a user, mark to run in every test cycle. Together, these heuristics provide a subset of tests to be run in the next test cycle. So let's look at each of these in a little more detail. First up is the weighted association between test and changed code. What that means is that CDD is performing an analysis to determine which files in the repository were changed since the last build. But it's also determining which tests actually touch the changed files or classes. And CDD does this mapping through a Java agent that's installed in the environment where the application that's being tested is running. The agent receives a notification each time CDD runs a test suite, and it identifies the classes that participate in the execution of that test. So in this example, test suite 2 is mapped to files 2, 3, 4, and 9 in the repository. And the same mapping is done for every test suite that's run. Before we move on, it's worth making a couple of points about this Java agent. First, it is a Java agent. We hope to add additional agents in the future, but for now, this level of mapping is limited to Java-based tests. You can certainly use other types of tests in the release pipeline and still get many of the benefits of the test module, but you get the most benefit from Java-based tests. The second thing to mention is that there is some additional installation and configuration that's required to take advantage of this mapping. I'm not going to show the details of installing the Java agent in this course, but there is detailed information available about this in the test module section of the product documentation. So once this initial mapping is done, the agent passes the information back to CDD. And CDD then inverts that map. So instead of starting with the test suites, the inverted map starts with each file in the repository and shows which test suite or suites correspond to those files. Now, when CDD receives notification of a new build, it identifies the list of files or classes that were updated in that build. Then it can use the defined map to suggest the test suites that are associated with and relevant to the updated files. And this is how CDD selects the tests that are relevant to the latest build changes. In this build, there were no changes to files 4, 5, or 6, for example, or to the tests associated with those files, which means there's really no need to run those tests. So every time a build is run, there's going to be a different list of files that changed. So there's also going to be a different list of tests that are selected to run. The second heuristic relates to what we call flaky tests. So what is a flaky test? A flaky test is one that failed several times in past executions or that is unstable, meaning that sometimes it passes and sometimes it fails, but it's inconsistent. Also, any tests that failed in the previous test cycle are automatically flagged to be run again. All that to say, tests that fail frequently are much more likely to be run in the next execution. The third heuristic relates to new or updated test suites. Anytime a developer adds or updates a test, the adaptive testing module automatically flags those tests to be run in the next cycle. The assumption is that a new test or even an entire test suite is added to cover changes in the code, and those tests need to be run in the next test execution. Running these tests also facilitates the mapping that we talked about in the first heuristic, so that those tests can be identified as relevant or not in subsequent executions. New or updated tests are typically identified through the relationship of the individual plugin and the test framework. So how these tests are identified varies a little depending on the plugin that's used. But the important point is that new or updated tests are flagged for the next test execution, regardless of which framework or plugin is used. And the last heuristic is pretty straightforward. If we have a test that is so critical that it really needs to be run in each execution, we can flag that test to ensure it always runs. One quick note on that, just be careful about flagging too many tests is important. If you do, you run the risk of increasing the test cycle time and losing the benefit of adaptive testing. So those are the heuristics that support the first benefit of reducing the test cycle time. One final note about these heuristics. In the beginning of a release, we typically want to run all of the tests so that the mapping can be built out for future executions. Also, as we move closer to production, we probably want to run all of the test suites to confirm the quality of the release. But in between, adaptive testing lets you focus on just the relevant, flaky, new, and very important tests to save time in the testing cycle by ignoring tests and code that have not changed. And just know the adaptive testing feature can be turned on or off at any time within the release task that runs the test. So we always have control over whether we're running all of the tests or a subset. The second benefit that the CDD test module brings to the pipeline is built-in analytics to help continuously improve. For each test run, the test advisor summary shows which tests were run and why they were selected. And we can drill down into additional results to determine which tests passed and which tests failed. The adaptive testing results and adaptive testing insights reports provide even more information and analysis of each test execution and help to identify trends and anomalies in the tests that have run. The third benefit is related to improving test quality. We can confirm that the latest code changes have sufficient test coverage, and we can identify any existing gaps in the tests. And this is more than just overall test coverage. CDD also focuses on the coverage that's in place for new and updated code specifically. And this highlights issues where the overall coverage might be great, but new code is being introduced without associated tests. The Release Quality Report provides detailed information about the quality of the release and helps to quickly assess any risks and evaluate the effectiveness of your test automation strategy. It provides details around code churn and specifics for each of the work items in the release. The work items section shows the status of the work item, the number of files in the repository that are associated with it, and the number of commits. We can also see the files that are updated, the number of updated files without test coverage, as well as the total number of tests and the flaky tests for each work item. From this report, we can drill down into additional details for each application and assess more information about the test distribution, flaky tests, and uncovered files in the application. And this is also where we can confirm the latest code changes have sufficient test coverage and identify any existing gaps in the tests. So those are the three main benefits of the CDD test module and how it can help reduce test cycle time, optimize testing activities, and improve overall release quality.